Matthew, we're live. Hold on. See.
Hi everyone.
Shall we see if Hans-Ulrich
Yeah.
is here?
It's cute. Lots of people are showing up.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Nice
How
to
are
see
you?
Good.
Great to
We are
see
very
you.
good here. We just finished installing the show today, and
Yeah.
you're the first guest.
Well, and also
Yeah, I'm incredibly excited. It's great to see you both.
in Pom-Pom Paradise. Okay,
So,
see?
yeah, now you see the corridor we made.
Well, I'm gonna actually switch around. So now
Wow.
we see you. Let's start from the beginning.
So, I just wanted to give you a tour of the show, like a quick tour. I prepared a few little things for you.
Yeah, it would be great to see. It would be great to see the exhibition, because last time we saw each other was actually in Zurich, and it was with you and Nicolas Tremblay and many friends, and you were installing an exhibition at the Kunsthalle, which is the exhibition prior to Berlin, which is a very collaborative exhibition with Isabel Lewis and you and several other artists. Can you maybe tell us about the show in Zurich, just as a kind of an entry to the show in Berlin?
Oh, totally. That show, it just ended up closing very recently. And I had the privilege to make the set design for the dance performance of Isabel Lewis, which had like so many collaborators and artists involved. So I had a kind of privilege to make these huge backdrops that were made site-specifically at Kunsthalle for a durational dance performance that happened every day at Kunsthalle Zurich, in which it was a kind of ecosystem developing over the whole period of the show, where the dance also developed. Also the soundtrack that was done by Labor, which is a Berlin-based music collaborative. They also like made the soundtrack that developed over the whole course of time. And the paintings in that show were so cool because they went floor to ceiling, and they were made with silk screens, which actually is like helped me lead after this project, brought me many more ideas. But then they were attached on ropes, and you could pull them up on this pulley system, which isn't like so unlike these pom-pom in a way, but they would go up and down, and the dancers would manipulate them according to the performance they were doing in the room, so that they could like also move under the paintings and go like all around, and also like animate the paintings. So yeah.
And it's been an incredible autumn for you, because not only Zurich, there is also a project in Vienna. We missed each other in Vienna by a few days. Can you tell us about what's happening in Vienna? Because there is a ballet project, performance.
Project Hans is, yeah, I can tell you about it. That was a live dance performance that is postponed until we can have an audience, but I turned it into a film, which is now being edited. I'm working on an essay right now for this film, and I'm going to publish it online quite soon. And it's a dance performance that is a reimagining of a 1930s ballet by Lou Christensen. That was an American ballet, and it's considered the first American ballet. And it's with, it takes place in a gas station in the middle of nowhere, with a beautiful gas station, and the lead dancer is wearing a translucent gas station attendant costume, which was pretty risque for the 30s. And we reimagined this with a new set design by the sculptor Lucy Stahl, who's here in Berlin. And she also worked on the costume designs. And we worked with a local cast of Viennese ballet dancers from different areas of expertise. Some were very punk, some were more classical, but we had a beautiful cast that reinterpreted this 1930s ballet.
And before we now enter the exhibition, maybe another a bit more general question. I found an interview you did actually online where you say that you work in large-scale format paintings, ceramics, and when luck has it, in live performance. You say, at first I was producing these large-scale paintings as projection screens and backdrops for performances, and through that work I was able to think through issues of scale and narrative. Can you tell us maybe a little bit, because I think it would be interesting to hear how you came to explore all these different aspects in the work, in your Gesamtkunstwerk in a way, the performance, the painting, the ceramic, the installation. We're going to immerse in one in a minute, but it could be great a little bit to hear how you got to that and how it somehow works, how it all kind of grew out of performance.
Well, that's true. I started to work on painting because I was looking for a format to translate performance. And so I was first producing large format paintings and using them as projection screens to exhibit performance documentation on top of. It had a lot to do with an interest in coming from New York, where I'm from, the legacy of like Judson dance, and a lot around indexical object making and the index. And so I think I came to like this idea of collapsing all of this time and space inside of an object. So you have like these large format works that have gesture and color. So there's a lot of affect on them. And then you were able to use this as a platform-based material to then transmit other information. Like performance documentation. Actually, yeah, you met some of the first people I was working with on that, the musician Sophie, who you know. And we were doing those first pieces together that I was projecting on top of those paintings. And in terms of scale,
and of course,
I'm glad you asked this question about scale, because this show deals a lot with these issues of scale, both in terms of representation, like in painted forms, but also in terms of like physical scale and dealing with the architecture of like a lived space.
Great, and now let's enter the work. Let's immerse into the
So I have a treat for you. So listen, the very first piece in the show is this pom-pom piece that you see, which I titled An Opening in the Field, which actually is a kind of biography of Robert Duncan, the poet. And I was introduced to Robert Duncan's poetry through Greg Bordovitz, who's a big fan. And he uses this poem a lot in his lectures and his public speaking. And I wanted to read you the first few lines of the poem. So
Amazing.
It's called, "Often I am permitted to return to a meadow, as if it were a scene made up by the mind, that is not mine, but is a made place that is mine. It is so near to the heart, in eternal pasture folded in all thought, so that there is a hall therein, that is a made place, created by light, wherefrom the shadows that are forms fall." And this poem informed a lot of artworks for me, and I wanted to title the first piece in the show after this poem because it is a kind of tunnel that you travel through.
Beautiful, and
So
it's of course, we are already in it, we are in the pompons. As you said, it's a pluralistic form. It makes us think of costuming, of flowers, but it is also a filter actually in the exhibition, and it's a display feature. I mean, Richard Hamilton always told me we foremost remember exhibitions which also invent a display feature. And of course, he thought of Marcel Duchamp, the callbacks in the Surrealist show, which actually Leonora Carrington told me about when she, worked with him on it. Now, actually, the strings, the ropes was Leonora Carrington in New York, and the callbacks were in Paris. In the Paris Surrealist exhibition, it was the callbacks, and in New York, the ropes. And in your case, it's neither ropes, no callbacks, but it's pompons. It's a display feature through which one sees the paintings. Can you tell us about the display feature and then maybe a segue into the paintings you show?
Okay, so let's go a little bit further to take you a little bit further in. And so I love the pompon because it's very playful and also because it is something, it's something that is like a design feature, but also something that plays between forms, you know, because it also can be something that relates to clothing, to textile, that has very close to do with the human form. And then through its like decorative abilities, it like expands outside of the human form into the world. And as a filter in this show, it's a kind of layer. And there's a big play on this idea of the decorative object and systems of design and hierarchy in this show. As you can see, also there's a full pink carpeting in the show. And the whole space has a pink carpeting. And I chose the color of the pink, also with the pink pompons, because I was just making the paintings for this exhibition and over the last year with a lot of pink tones inside the paintings. And I decided to saturate the entire space in this color palette that I was already working inside of my paintings to also play with systems of design and hierarchy. So this idea of various levels that are stratified between like the ground, the middle, and the above is like very well represented in this painting, which is also like the first painting in the show, which we used also for the poster. That's called Exhausted Angel Receives an Announcement. You know, I was really into the Maria Mertz angel wing paintings, you know, those ones that are just angel wings. And that led me to like many other interests into Giotto, into representations of angels and announcements, where you have in a religious painting, you know, you have the hand pointing down from the sky. Which you have here, there's these hands that are reaching down towards this tired figure. Actually, it's a Rodin sculpture, and you have here a kind of re-representation of the Rodin sculpture here. And I added these angel wings on top of it. Also, I kind of displaced the time period because I was including this like Rococo style pine tree. And this idea of a Rococo time period pops up in like a lot of the works in the show. This also has to do, later on, you're gonna see some ceramics. This also ties into those.
There are also links to architecture, no? Because basically, you told me in Zurich, we spoke about the fact that, you know, you often have theatrical illusions and architectural sort of indications on the paintings, links to spaces.
Well, I think this is like a conversation around scale, you know. You have like, of course, in this work, it's not like as clear. Maybe I take you to another one, because I think it's more interesting the way you see it in this other work, because here it's like the human form takes the form of a kind of architecture, and I think that's more represented here. This one, actually, this one I had made some notes to talk to you about, because this one, there is this combination of figures that are also lifted from Rodin sculptures, but really specifically from Rodin's Gates of Hell, which is, you know, there's all of his figures through his whole career as a sculptor, like put on top of this and kind of impastoed all over the surface. And those figures themselves, like the human body, accumulates and creates the space itself. You know, of course, they're kind of glued onto this architectural, but it's almost arbitrary in a way, this form, because the content is the form. It's all of the people, and they are making the architecture. And that's what I was trying to represent a bit here, like where you have these body parts around the edges that are also creating the frame of the work. You see through bodies to see more bodies. But this work is titled The Ray. Also, like to go to like the Jenny Hanaver, like the stingray that's sculpted into a kind of grimace. But then also it goes to Chardin and his famous painting, The Ray, that has this kind of, also the stingray opened up in the painting. And so I was connecting these different links in time in terms of the distorted form going through time. And then I thought this figure, in a way, it's also a kind of ray, and you see this kind of abstraction lifting out through it.
What's the role of titles in your painting? Because most of the paintings have title. I mean, the show is called Window to the Clouds, but each painting, I mean, there is, you mentioned the Exhausted Angel, there is the Wings of Flamingos, Kamak, they all have titles. What's the role of titles?
Storytelling. I mean, I think, you know, inside of all these works, I'm trying to link it, but like inside all these works, there's like, the titles are another point of entry. It's like, you know, there's like, you can enter like viscerally through like sensual textures, there's color. You can also enter through like more discursive narrative layers, which have to do with like language and information. I don't really ever put text inside my works. I don't see them as like didactic in terms of like putting text inside, but I really appreciate when I look at artwork to be allowed inside of the work through other types of layers. And I think the titling allows for a type of viewership that can go deeper. So I treat it like that. It's a kind of generosity.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And the idea of the layering is, of course, very present in all of these paintings. There is the layering of the acrylics, there is the brushworks. And I remember when I visited your studio for the very first time, it was many years ago, you also showed us printmaking as an aspect.
Yeah, that's true.
It was in LA, and also with drawing. So what's the process now of these paintings? Can you tell
Let me show you this one. This is a good one to describe.
It would be great, yeah, to kind of understand how you actually do them. Do you do sketches beforehand, or how is the process? I'm always very curious about the process.
I think this one's good to show you. It's like, this one, it's actually, it's funny. It's like, I was really into looking at a lot of Hodler's drawings, and I really, even better than his paintings, of course, I also really like those landscapes, but when he draws figures outside of the paintings, just the sketches of Ferdinand Hodler, the drawings are gorgeous because he's able to like achieve amazing figuration with like really simple lines. So actually all of these figures are sketched from different Hodler drawings that are kind of collaged together. And I guess, to be very frank, the way it's done is I draw the sketches on huge pieces of paper that are made to scale with the painting. Then I think like Alex Katz, he kind of does similar. You know, you make a huge drawing on a piece of brown paper, then that uses as a template. Then on top of that, I can sketch other papers or other translucent papers like plastics or tracing papers, and I'm able to create stencils with that, which is a type of technique I learned through printmaking, actually, through silkscreen. I did a lot of stencil making. And so here you see, like, very literally, like, all of the technical layers. Like, you see here the first layer of this pink, the second layer of this darker red, and they're all done with a stenciling technique, actually. And all of the charcoal is actually just descriptive, in fact. It's not part of a technical process, it's part of like an illustrative process to redefine all of the forms later on, actually. But all of the drawing is actually done in advance and then cut out with knives and stencils. I always thought it's like very interesting because when you get really close, you can see all of those layers. And this is like I was saying before with the titling of the works, I see this as like a very accessible entry point for people, like just to look at the tactility of things.
And what's the title of this painting, the one we're looking at now, the painting which is inspired by
This
Hodler?
one is called Thunberg Greets the Nations on the 23rd of September, 2019. I made this work with this child painter. There was like a little child holding a paintbrush with a little paint bucket, meeting these kind of ominous figures on top. At the same time when Greta Thunberg was doing this huge, amazing conference where she gave a speech at the United Nations. So I named it after this date.
Can we see some other paintings in the room? Because there's so much to see.
This is like really connected to a shared story I feel like we also have. These two works are made from flowers that I found on the street in Rio de Janeiro, close to Francis Reynolds' house. And
At a residency.
yeah, at the residency that she organizes. And so actually during these last months, I was thinking a lot about our inability to travel, and it was a lot of memories coming back. And so I was looking back on those experiences, and you see the outlines here, they're like the streets of Brazil, the sidewalks. You see it?
Yeah.
And these outlines are kind of abstractions of Burle Marx architecture seen from above, aerial views.
Yeah, you know, I was in this house also where you had the residency, and we did this entire book of Brazilian interviews. I cannot.
Yes,
I
I
wrote.
looked at it there.
I wrote the book there. Yeah, so
It's not translated yet.
Yeah, not yet. It has to come out. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you, as we're seeing, is really thank you so much for showing us all this amazing exhibition. I wanted to ask you about the link to theory, because I hear that you take online classes in queer theory every week on Thursday, like a ritual. And it's kind of interesting because this exhibition has also a link to theory, because in the press text, the reference to the performance theorist Jose Esteban Munoz, from the very important book Cruising Utopia from 2009 about futurity, being can be a problem. That's the quote you use. And I was just curious, thinking about the title actually of the exhibition related to clouds and this entire exhibition, if you could talk a little bit about the link to theory and how theory enters because you talked about the process, and I think theory plays an important part also in that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this goes back to one of your earlier questions talking about backdrops, because when everything started to fold in on itself for me, it happened actually through painting. And what Jose Esteban Munoz talks about in Cruising Utopia, he talks about these windows that theatricality, like queer performance, gives to the audience to look through. And he talks about the type of possible futures inside of a present experience displayed on stages and in queer performance. Because the idea is that queer performers, they present alternatives to current situations that exist in the present and in a type of utopian space. And what happened for me was that I was able to think, what if you could collapse this idea of a stage inside of a painted space? And you could, the stage, like the painting is the platform, is the stage, is the space of representation. It is an indexical object. It is a performance document. This thing itself, like, is the collapsed time space of a performance. And so I thought, why can't the idea of this painted backdrop also be like a collapsed time space that's a representation of a queer utopian space? And that was a gift that Esteban Munoz gave to me by explaining that. This idea of the potentiality in a time space for performance. And this theory
so much. Now, I was also told, I actually heard rumors that there are some ceramics also.
Oh, you want to see?
Exhibition. And I'm very curious about the ceramics, because of course you've been making ceramics with Silmara Batari, actually a Brazilian ceramicist. You've been working with Chinese and also Anagama pottery, in Japan. So I'm very interested in the ceramic aspect of your work, and of course also you often referred to ceramics as a form of ready-made, also a cultural ready-made.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the idea of craft is so interesting because the way you can work is that you're able to immerse yourself inside of a space, to learn, inside of a cultural experience, to learn how to make something that's like totally interwoven into cultural histories of a time and a place. Not even to mention like the geological materials of that place, like the actual dirt. So like I always think ceramics is like a point of like deep collaboration, that you're able to connect with artists and with history and with like the actual physical location that you're in. And these works, I'll show you. This was like, so I installed this series of plates hanging on the wall in a row, like a kind of decorative frame that frames not only the painting above me, but also frames the physical space we're in.
Yeah.
It was my link to also talk about the pom-pom, that the plates also do a more critical behavior because they also engage like painted space, but also they are actually like a functional object that is used as a decorative object. And standing in the middle of the room is this, are these tatamis, which are put there so that the audience can lay down and look at the painting up on the ceiling. And the audience, when finally we have people coming here in real life, but right now it's just me and Tricia, but we are lying down on these headrests, which are actually, many of them are in the shape of children. It's a little baby. It's a kind of baby headrest. These are made also connecting to the history of Rococo painting and the collection of bric-a-brac, like that Francois Boucher had a huge collection of bric-a-brac and chinoiserie. And these were made as imitations, crude imitations of headrest pillows in the shape of children. You also have ones that have small figures inside of them here that are like have reclining figures set inside. So actually you resting your head on the whole figure itself above. These ones were all made in Paris, just are hand built. I fired them in the studio of Sylvie Auvray, ceramicist there, but all the plates have a really beautiful story. They're made in this factory called Los Arianas in Granada, in Spain. And they taught me so many amazing things. Lots of glazing techniques and also brushwork techniques there, because they use these long, thin brushes to make kind of smooth lines. And these ones were also made at the same time when I did my series Keramikos with the artist Natsuko Uchinu, who's a college buddy of mine. And we do a collaboration where we make ceramics together and throw dinner parties together.
Amazing.
These all have landscapes painted on them as a kind of abstraction. And then it moves, they develop over the series, sometimes like receding and sometimes becoming more dense. And then they're saturated with these red-crowned cranes. These red-crowned cranes are kind of twirling inside of the frames.
Totally amazing. And can you tell us more about the ceiling? It would be great to have a little bit, because it was very quick before, if you could have views maybe of the ceiling. That is a little, because you very often, when you do exhibition, you actually do the exhibition where the exhibition takes place. I mean, I saw that in many of your shows that you actually work in the city where you realize it. And that's, of course, a work you've created for the show here. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, this painting is made exactly to fit like inside of this particular room. You know, not only is like making site-specific works like a form of generosity, but it's also a form of exposing the relationships that you have with the place and the people you're making the work with. Like making site-specific works, for example, it becomes nearly impossible when you have like difficult social relations. And I always think that the possibility to produce site-specific works exposes the dynamics and complex relationships you have with the location and the people that make that location. And here you have, well, actually, it's it's the last work that was produced for the show. And it's a direct narrative to where I was able to escape with Stéphanie Moidon, and we went to Arles right before the lockdown got really severe in Paris. And we escaped for a week and had a kind of inspiration trip together to release our thoughts. And we went and visited the flamingos in the Kamel. And there's these wings. I saw the wings of the flamingos, and I realized that the opening painting of the show that I wanted to have in the little maquette was the exhausted angel. And I thought, actually, they're here. they're already here. And so I removed the wings from the flamingo like a Gabriel angel fallen down. And there's two huge flamingo wings on either side framing the entire work. Inside there's a kind of swirling psychedelic abstraction of flowers that's totally free-formed.
Amazing, but many congratulations. This is an amazing show. I promised that this will not be a marathon, so we thought to do it for half an hour, but I do have one or two last questions, and I hope we can continue. It's so immensely inspiring. We should do a part two. So this is kind of, we're coming to the end of part one, and I wanted to ask you my only, recurrent question in all the interviews, which is about the unrealized project. Because we know a lot about architects' unrealized projects. We know very little about artists' unrealized projects. And as Alighiero Boetti always told me, we should ask artists about their unrealized projects and then help them realize them. And I've just published this, edited actually this little magazine about 39 projects of artists, kind of recent unrealized projects. And you've made a wonderful contribution. Can you tell us about this unrealized project?
Oh my gosh, I have too many unrealized projects that I could tell you about. I'll tell you about that one, but I wanted to tell you about a different one actually. I'll save it for part two. That one, well, that one is also online now and you can see it, but I want to make a Horny Surf Club Foundation for horny surfers all around the world. And I want to do it in Rio de Janeiro at the Jautinga Beach because there's this amazing, beautiful S-shaped modernist architecture building right on the cliff of the beach. And it overlooks this crazy little enclave that has amazing tiny waves. And all the surfers there, they ride on little short boards, which I always thought is like a very macho thing to be like pounding on these waves with little tiny surfboards. But I would like to make a Horny Surf Club Foundation inside of that apartment building that's open to all horny surfers all over the world that can all stay there and develop it as an archive, as a living archive inside the apartment building and accumulate photographs and videos from all those horny surfers from around the world, because we need to open up the love of surf to all horny people out of the closets and into the waves.
And then there are many more unrealized projects. I actually hear rumors that you have an unrealized project with Sophie, and that's of course interesting because that is actually connects to the band you had together, Motherland. You had a band together with Sophie, but it seems that there is an unrealized project.
Yeah, don't get me started because you're gonna make me cry. So love Sophie with all my heart. And the unrealized project with Sophie is I have the biggest fantasy to make a collapsible, gigantic, huge, elaborate band stage that can go to all major music festivals. That is a series of paintings that collapse and fold out and to create like a huge kind of stadium style stage on collapsible frames. And that this stage will travel all over the world to all major music festivals. And by making this stage, the collaboration of Motherland would be able to continue because we've spent so much time together that then it would be like the stage itself would be a kind of physical representation of like this time-lapse extended collaboration. When are we gonna do it, bro?
That's amazing. And actually, I had one or two brilliant projects, and I had it's so great to hear about these two unrealized projects. Is there a third one?
Oh my gosh. I mean, the third one would definitely be to participate in a kind of reality TV show, maybe RuPaul's Drag Race. That's it.
It's fascinating because actually we have in the book here, in the Unrealized Project book, Maxwell did Maxwell Alexander, Brazilian artist, proposed also as his unrealized project, a reality TV show. Now, another question I wanted to ask you, and I forgot that at the beginning, and I thought it would be really interesting for everyone who joined us today, and thank you all so much for joining us. I thought it would be great to hear about your lockdown. And I mean, we all have our reading lists from lockdown. I've just been reading Tim Ingold's amazing book, Correspondences, the social anthropologist and environmental.
Oh my God. Did
It's
you
an
read,
incredible book. It's like letters to trees and beautiful.
is that the book that also talks about him doing basket weaving on the beach?
Exactly.
Oh my God. This I wrote about. So I have to tell you something. In the next month, I'm publishing one of my first books ever. And it's a ceramic book collaboration with Natsuko Uchino on all of our latest ceramics that Norm is publishing. Norm is the graphic designers, and Koenig is publishing, and it's going to be released before the end of the year. It's going to be a 2020 book. And in the book, we quote Tim Ingold's chapter on basket weaving, because he says in that book that that by making something, and by the act of making something, his students learned more than they learned in like their whole semester of school by sitting on the beach and working with their hands and actually touching the materials and making the baskets themselves.
And it's definitely one of my favorite books of the year. It just came out, Correspondences, and it sort of takes the form of letters. And he also says that, you know, we sort of lose the art of letter writing. And he says it's so important in terms of caring, and that we sort of don't just send emails and text messages, but that we come back to this idea of a letter, to liberate the time to write letters. What is your reading list? What are the most exciting books you've read over the lockdown?
I reread a lot of Jane Bull's stories. I got to spend more time with them. And right now, I'm reading that Welbeck book about the art world just to lighten the mood a little bit. That's what I'm reading right now. Besides, like I can barely keep up with all of my queer theory reading lists. I'll send them to you in an email. It's too much to explain all of that reading list. I can barely keep up with my class. There's too much reading every week.
And what about L'Invention de Morel?
Am I reading that?
I hear rumors.
Well, that was part actually of the reading list of Morel was part of the reading list from my queer theory class, which actually is about queer archives. It's an archivist, it's called Becoming Queer Archives, and it's organized by the Kino Arsenal. And we read Morel and had a really amazing discussion about it recently. Call me naive, I never read it before, so it was the first time for me, and it was extremely eye-opening to think about like this collapsed time space. I was like, wait a minute, that's what I'm working on with my whole ballet and everything. So it was kind of like a mind screw.
And that, of course, leads to another question, which is the question of the archive. Arthur Fure told me a lot about your archive, and I was curious how, because you're doing so many extraordinary projects, you do so many exhibitions, performances, now also books. What about the archive? How is your archive organized? Because some artists have a very organized archive. And if you think about Gerhard Richter's Atlas, that is, you know, it was a work, and it is a work, but it's also an archive. Yet at the same time, with some artists, you know, it's more chaotic. Some artists don't have an archive at all, because the idea of the archives, you know, prevents them from working. So there's so many different relationships artists have to archive, and it's obviously something I've always been very, you know, interested in. So, but I never heard you talk about your archive. I just know from Arthur that you do have an archive.
I actually do. It was a huge step for me to start to realize that, and it's of course very much ongoing. But I do have to say, it feels a lot like taking all of your clothes off and letting people like look at you totally nude, because you can't do it alone. You need a lot of help to do it. And so I've had to give a lot of, it's been a big collaboration with all of the people who have had work with me in my studio, including Arthur, and now my new assistant, Julien Logier. So there's been a lot of people helping me to do it. You know, going back to like the works in the show, actually, like a huge inspiration, like I said at the very beginning, was Rodin's Gates of Hell. Mm-hmm. And, you know, which actually wasn't even realized as a sculpture. He like sold the rights to the French government after he died, and they produced the work. This was a work that went his whole life, like an archive. It is a type of archive. And this is like a kind of, while I haven't been producing any kind of work like that, this was a huge point of inspiration for me, the idea of like an infinite object that goes on, that's so big, you can't even realize the capacity of that thing to exist in the world.
Now we've talked about so many dimensions of your practice. You know, we had poetry, thanks to the wonderful poem you read us, and of course poetry is important for you. We talked about writing, we talked about the ceramics, we talked about the paintings, we talked about theory. There's one thing which is the very first thing of yours, which I saw when we met in LA in your studio, which we haven't addressed, and that's also not in the exhibition, but I still wanted to ask you if you continue to work with that and what role it plays, and that's printmaking. Because you've always been an amazing printer also, and printmaking is a really important dimension of the many dimensions of your work. Where does that stand right now? Are you working on new printmaking? And what's the role of printmaking?
Well, I'm going to use this as a question to take us back through the hallway.
Wonderful.
So the printmaking, actually the last print edition I made was a huge collaboration with a lot of writers, where I accumulated a group of writers and they gave me a bunch of their poems to work with. And I was able to work with a lithography studio in Paris, and they helped me to create this beautiful portfolio with Véronique Paquette in Geneva at the Centre Édition. And we produced this beautiful box set called Scrolls in the Wind. And it was with wonderful artists and poets like Cyrus Dunham and Sharon Hayes and Emily Sundblad and Harry Burke and Amy Silman, and everybody contributed poems, and they allowed me to work as an illustrator to illustrate their poems. And we did that in layers of lithoplates. So I was able to print their poetry and then print other layers of colors and drawings on top of their poetry. Yeah, that was really great. But you know, I'm continuing to do a lot of silk screens. I mean, at the Kunsthalle Zurich, you have all of those screen prints on all those paintings, you know? It's more of a folding in of everything right now. Like the prints are going in
Zurich,
the
the paintings are, because you're back to your display feature, the pompons, and of course, in Zurich, the paintings, the printed paintings were the display feature that were hanging in the space.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, they were also this idea of something that's like on the strings. Here it's like a kind of, it's like almost like a detached surface, because the paintings are here, but then the strings are here. So it's like everything mixed, like everything in layers on top of each other, totally detached. I mean, we're in a total tunnel matrix here. So everything is in a kind of, it's like the particles got ripped apart.
How many pom-poms?
There are 2,889 pom-poms in this show.
Oh, wow.
All arranged by Matthew.
And a big team here. It was a big team.
But
I'm
really,
so happy I could tour this show.
Many congratulations to you. Many congratulations to the curator, to Patricia Kamp. This is an amazing show. And I had actually one or two last questions to
Oh my gosh,
wrap it
really?
up. Yes, actually, because I thought it would be interesting, because during this lockdown and, you know, in 2020, we've seen much less exhibitions than what we usually would, right? And yet at the same time, we've seen, you know, art and you've said actually in an interview that you've been very inspired by Tourmalin's work, that you've also been inspired, of course, by the experience in Zurich, you know, working with Isabel Lewis and many other artists, and that you've also been impressed or inspired by what Miriam Benani did online. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and what else inspires you. And also, there have been several questions also or comments actually from participants tonight who sort of are curious about, you know, how you connect to other artists. Who are your artist peers with whom you're closest to? Are you part of a group?
Okay, many questions. There was different questions in there.
I know.
All right. Well, okay. Specifically, okay. So Miriam's videos about the lockdown in New York City with her animals. I don't know exactly how she got, but the animations that she made, that she posted on Instagram, were extremely, extremely inspiring to me. They were so unafraid to be documents of her experience and her participation inside of this extremely difficult time we're living in. And this ability to bridge the diaristic and the kind of through the diaristic through a filter of your own creative universe that makes the work palatable and accessible to an audience this type of translation of personal experience was extremely powerful to me and also helped me to realize this show. My friends that I work with, the people I find, I think the idea of collaborating is not the idea of like putting two works together. The idea of collaborating with other artists is about being able to learn from other people and be able to develop your own work through bonds you create creatively with others. And I find that like deep collaboration with Isabel Lewis, I've known her since I was a student in New York. She programmed my first dance performances in like the Movement Research Dance Festival in the different programs she was doing, and gave me all of the education I had as an introductory to live works. And furthermore, like my deep collaborator in ceramics, Natsuko Uchino, who I make my ceramics with the book and everything, this is like always about sharing knowledge. And you have to bring a lot to the table when you are participating in those type of collaborations. You don't come empty-handed. You come like ready to deliver lots of material, information, and inspiration to like breed these new types of objects.
And that leads us to the very last question I wanted to ask you, because actually sharing, I want to ask you also about teaching. Are you teaching?
Yes, I'm not a full-time teacher because I'm kind of like a mean teacher. And so when I do it too much, I'm like a little bit too, but I do love to teach. I teach at the École in Lausanne. And I really love the students there. And it's a great master's program that I teach in that's directed by Stéphanie Moidon. And I used to teach at the Dutch Art Institute. I taught performance art. And that's most of the teaching that I do. I'm quite dedicated to teaching in Lausanne, and I love having a legacy with those students. It's very inspiring to be able to follow up with people in that way.
Yeah, we love it, Carl. And of course, it's a moment also to remember the amazing Pierre Keller.
It's a very important, you know, I got to spend some very good quality time with him just before his passing. We had our shows simultaneously at the consortium in Dijon, and we got to spend some really nice evenings together and like sharing each other's works and looking at each other's exhibitions. He's a very inspiring figure, very full of joy.
I just see here, it's actually, we began with the display feature. We are back to the to the display feature. And it's very exciting, you know, because I see here in the comments that the Pierre Soulages Foundation is following us tonight. And I actually remember many years ago, I interviewed Pierre Soulages in SED. And we talked a lot about paintings being display feature, you know, because he hangs the paintings. If you think about this show at Pompidou, you know, hangs the paintings in the space. There's an interesting link between the show in Baden-Baden and, you know, in a way, in terms of display. Very last question. We spoke about teaching, we spoke about sharing. Rainer Maria Rilke wrote this fantastic little book, which is an advice to a young poet. And I wanted to ask you what in 2020 would be your advice to a young art student?
Gosh, that is so difficult. It was so challenging, but you know what? What I would say is don't forget to talk to your friends every day. Call all your friends every day, because if you can't see them in real life, you have to talk to them nonstop. Don't stay alone. We're always all together, and there's a lot of creativity inside everybody and all of them. And it's important to express yourself, even if you can't access your studio. Like, just do some phone drawings. Get on top of it. Don't stop making things. It's important to make things, because making things is how you touch the world.
I mean, there could not be a more wonderful conclusion. Matthew, thank you so much. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you all for joining us tonight. See you soon.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you for being our guest.
And I think you have to have another conversation. I mean, Matthew is just a it's very inspiring and I hope you're going to have another conversation.
I'm so happy to tour you, Hans.
I'm so excited. Let's continue. This is end of part 1. See you soon.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everybody to join us.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, Hans.
Thank you. Bye.
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 That was so nice. I'm so glad everyone could join us. Bye.